LCBN television broadcasts 24/7 on UK Freeview Channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Google TV, See Love World, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Lydia. Thank you again for everyone who was so generous with their love, their congratulatory messages as we celebrated 1 year in August. And you would have noticed that it was sort of a throwback month. We showed quite a few episodes of programs we filmed or recorded last year. And thank you to everyone who doesn't watch but listens on podcasts, and those who later on catch up on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for sharing your time. I know life is full, so we are grateful that you actually find time to listen, to watch, and most especially to subscribe and send us comments of what you think, programs we should rerun, and topics and subjects that we should explore. Maybe the ones we haven't talked about, or ones that we've had before and you would just like a different perspective, or a guest even that you might suggest, or you might want to join us on the conversation. Today I've got a gentleman with me, and we're going to talk about something that seems quite prevalent now, or we hear a little bit more of than we used to. Not that it didn't happen in the past, but I think now we hear about it a lot more. We're going to be talking about suicide. What it means. What is suicide ideation? What makes somebody think that's the only way out? How can we help? How can we spot the signs? How can we reach out to somebody who is feeling suicidal? Perhaps they've shared it with you. Perhaps you think they're going down that road. Please join me as I welcome Chukes.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Chukes. Thank you again for joining. I know we've had a program that you spoke about suicide and its impact. So we're back again because I feel this is a wider platform than we had before, just to talk about the same subject, which I know you do quite a lot of work around. So please share a little bit about yourself before we go into all the questions I have.
Right. So my parents were from the Caribbean and Africa, Jamaica and Nigeria, and I was born in London back in 1960, and it was a very different time then. And I then went to live in Nigeria for a while. Unfortunately, the Civil War broke out, and I came back to England in 1967. And then we later went to live in Jamaica, and I went to boarding school in this country. After leaving school, I trained in hotel and catering. And then I went off and studied esoteric studies and became a Christian Buddhist monk, and also qualified as a massage practitioner. And then from there, I left on to train as an assistant paramedic in the ambulance service. And lastly, I came down to Devon to read social work, and I qualified in 2007. I've been working around mental health, culture, and different things around that since. And I've a suicide prevention organization.
So your life actually is very interesting. I know you've shared quite openly about it before even the program, and how the cultures differ, or they're similar between the Jamaican and the Nigerian, and not to talk about the British culture, but let's just talk about those ones, and then we can.
Well, my experience is that they're both very fiery, and I'm told that they took slaves from Nigeria because my mother from Jamaica said she was of Nigerian descent, and when I did my DNA recently, I was very, very high Nigerian, and so for me, it feels like there's a sort of karmic link there between Jamaica and Nigeria. And then when you put England in there, you got the triangle.
So, well, that's a good mix. So how did family blend the cultures? How did that happen?
It was hard in the early days because there's not a lot of love lost between the separation. And one of the things I think which is interesting is that the very same things that could have happened in my intimate family life are one of the causes of suicide, which is this sense of separation, this sense of not belonging, this sense of, having to get approval from different people, different cultures. And so that culture of separation on many different levels, I think, is a really key aspect of suicide ideation.
Okay, because what you're saying is if somebody feels that they don't belong somewhere, they no longer fit.
Yeah.
Somehow they're different. Somehow
Yeah.
they're not fitting at home. They're not fitting in school. They're not
Yeah,
fitting at work. Then the idea of suicide and ending it all comes to them. Okay, so can you just describe in a simple way to anybody who's watching what somebody who is going towards that direction could be feeling or are feeling?
I think it's important to think, we sometimes use an analogy for the river and the river flowing downstream into the ocean type of thing. And what's really important with suicide, it doesn't normally start instantly. It's not the first thought that comes into someone. It's a build-up over time. So for me, one of the key things is the earlier we all get sensitive to people suffering, the better it will be. Because by the time we get to the suicide, when a person feels so alone to feel suicidal, that's practically too late. But it can also be helped. We can prevent it even at that late hour. But it's all the different bits of behavior and the way society looks at behavior and looks at people and makes people feel, which is really, really important. So for me, one of the roots to that is kindness. We have to have a degree of kindness. Yeah, and without that kindness, and I'm not talking about competition, that doesn't sound like a lot of kindness to me at times. Kindness then enables us to slowly take notice of when a person is suffering to then be able to help.
Okay, so it's about noticing that is there a kind of change? Because sometimes when people commit suicide, the people closest to them are sometimes shocked.
Yeah.
Because they say, we didn't have any idea, we never knew they were suffering. Yeah. Is that also a possibility that person could be suffering and they could mask it so
Definitely,
well?
Definitely. That phrase, suffering in silence. Yeah. But even still, within the silence, the sensitive we are, your intuition could kick in and go, something's not quite right. Yeah, we're very sensitive beings. And we have seconds, when we have that sense of feeling something's not quite right. So it's having the courage to notice that. And depending on how close you are, sometimes you're too close in a family, because you might have what I call family blindness, where you all,
Talk about that a little. Talk about
So family blindness or familiar habits are the way in which a family might all relate to different people in the family, a girl, a boy, the elder son, the younger son, all of those different stereotypes, which also become real in a family, then can create where you might have a son or a daughter that's doing really well, so you don't look at the one that's not doing so well. And, the lack, again, of interconnectedness, and that one child or person in the family might not feel that they fit in. So it's what then happens with those thoughts, because we can't get inside of someone else's head. But if the messages along the line of their life has been, you do not fit in, that's very hard then to get them to really show that they matter. Because, that's really important, they matter.
Okay. So just as I guess we're starting with the family because that's where the person is probably noticed or ignored the most. That's what
Yeah,
you're saying. Yeah.
yeah,
So focus could be on work. It could be another child that the parents love. It could be the competition,
mm,
the really bright child with
mm,
the one that isn't doing that well. But
yeah.
sometimes we also hear, children who are, or no, I shouldn't use the word children, but people who are doing well. Yeah.
I'm going to challenge that concept of well.
Okay.
Well, just because you have a degree of materiality does not mean you're doing well. Just
No,
because
what
you
I
seem
mean
to have a good
by
job
what I
doesn't.
mean by well
Mhm.
is maybe they're excelling.
Okay.
Yeah. So it might be a child who is getting good grades. It might be somebody, as you said, who's got a good job and seems to be earning or is earning quite a lot of
Yeah.
money, but inside they
So
might
that's
be.
right. So my challenge to that person or anybody, anytime, is how does our heart really feel in response to whatever we're doing? Sometimes you could be doing a job, your heart's not in the job, but you're doing it. You could be in a marriage that's your heart's not in. It could be anything. Is your heart in it, or is it just your head and your ability to make it look successful?
Okay.
So,
So people may appear well, but
yeah,
inside they're not.
yeah,
And then it's us who are around them
yeah,
noticing. So
yeah,
the first thing is being kind enough to notice.
yeah, yeah.
So in a family, sort of trying to make time for one another. That's what you're
Yeah,
saying. So
yeah.
if you're going to love, try and love equally.
Absolutely, but it's funny the language we talk about trying to love and kindness. These are just natural states. But if we look into our cultures, all the cultures across the world, something's not quite working out why we're not doing that in a natural state. And so in terms of the Buddha's teaching, he talks about the fact that life is suffering. And that's a fact. And so he's got a path to get us out of there. So I think once we acknowledge that practically everyone you meet is suffering to some degree, it enables you to hopefully be kinder to them. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I guess what you're saying, which with even with Christianity, we
Yeah.
do believe that life does have its challenges
Yeah.
and some of it includes suffering. But I think from what I understand you're saying is if we acknowledge that we have difficult things in our lives and
Yeah.
places where we're suffering, it means that the person next to us too
Absolutely.
has those kind of
Absolutely.
challenges. So
Yeah.
if we can look at ourselves, then we can
Yes.
empathize with the
Yeah.
next person. Yeah.
So when you said take notice was the first thing, I was going to back us up a bit and say, actually, self-compassion is the most important thing, which is exactly what you just talked about, where we are looking after ourselves to get ourselves into a more healthy, heal thyself situation that we can then respond.
Okay, to somebody. So say we're doing these things, yeah. How do I notice? Okay, I notice now. How do I engage somebody in that kind of conversation?
So the first thing is you can't force a person to, but I suppose some of the major things people say who've been there and come back, or it's about connecting.
Okay.
So, it's really ironic. One of the things we could look at it in so many different acronyms, but one of it is the 5 ways to well-being.
Okay.
Yeah. So the 5 ways to well-being is connect, keep learning, be active, take notice, and give. So even if you use those 5 different things, that could be a way of looking at how you do suicide prevention. You've got to connect with a person who is acting or you've observed acting in a certain way. You're connected. And then you've got to be able to have the courage to ask the question clearly. Yeah. So that's that because you might be the first person that really noticed that the person is suffering to that degree. And so to ask that question, which is quite a big question, is really important. And it's coming from your intuition, maybe, rather than your judgment. Does that make sense?
Yes. So saying something like I'm really worried about you, that could be a good opener.
It could be. I'm a bit naughty in terms of thinking about things because worry is like another energy which could create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it might sound like it's just language, but it's like it does become important. So you can say, I'm concerned about you. You don't seem to be your normal self because you've observed something. So when you don't normally just launch into just I'm worried about you because that could be more about you than it is about the person.
Yeah, I think why I'm asking these questions is because people who are listening,
yes, so
it's important that they also learn
yeah,
good language so that
yeah,
they can connect with the person. Because if what you're saying is somebody says, I'm worried about you, that can actually increase the stress on the other
yeah,
person because now
yeah, yeah.
they're now worried that mom, let's use
Yes, and that is a big one as well. Yeah. So they might tell a stranger more openly how they're feeling. Yeah, because we need to, as I say, to be alongside a person whilst they're suffering, not necessarily rescuing them in their suffering.
Okay.
And then, sorry.
No, I was going to ask you to explain the difference.
Yeah, so what I was going to say there was what's really important about suicide prevention work, even though we're talking invariably about other people and people who've died by suicide in time, our response is our ability to respond, responsibility. Yeah.
Okay.
However, we're not rescuing a person because it's free will, their choice, even if they want to kill themselves. I don't want them to, but it's free will. If a person does it for themselves, that gives them their inner resilience and their will to live. If someone just takes them away, you might be stopping that pain, which might be the pain that gives birth to their new self. You see what I'm trying to say? Because a lot of our Western medicine is to block the process rather than allowing the process to then be healed. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So actually engaging with the feelings,
Yeah,
talking it through, they might make that decision that actually living is better than dying. And that lesson, I think, stays with them, makes them more resilient,
absolutely,
able to deal with it if the thought comes along maybe a year or so when life gets difficult again and they go back to that place. The fact that they built that level of resilience against it, then they're able to overcome it in the future, as I guess opposed to what you're saying where people are medicated, numbed out and kind of live on medication instead of engaging with the difficulty.
But it does take people to be around them that allows that process. So the compassion through if we've worked hard on our own self-compassion, we can be with the person whilst they're suffering. And the other thing about it, why I pulled us up on the word worry, was that when you, it's almost like you don't know what's going to happen. So you could get worried about I don't want to engage because I've now opened a can of worms. What do I do now? What do I do now? So that's why, as we almost deprofessionalize suicide intervention, because a lot of people who take their lives aren't going to doctors, and they might have 5 minutes to talk to a doctor, or we might stereotype them and say men don't talk. And that's why maybe we have 2/3 more men than women taking their lives. So we need spaces to talk. We need to be able to be in a relaxed, calm, loving environment for that to happen. Yeah, because if you've been in a very competitive world, to suddenly feel your vulnerability is very hard. And that might be something that one of the reasons why people take their life.
Okay.
Yeah, what seemingly is a fall from grace.
Okay, for the person?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you sort of got into men and women. The fact that we feel men don't talk. So what you're saying in suicide prevention is about making it easier for the person to talk, whether they're male or female.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and would you, I'm not saying it's yet, we hear more men attempt suicide or actually commit suicide versus women.
Yes.
Would that be about this, we not maybe empathizing, or is it
Well,
society?
I think society has to take a collective way that we look at men and boys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whether it is to create men who are full of aggression or men who are seemingly soft. For me, there's the middle way in that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
the situation of allowing all genders, both genders, to be able to talk lovingly,
Mm-hmm.
rather than if you have something, you have to suppress it, and it's bitter, it's angry, it's sad. That doesn't help. So it's a degree of allowing peaceful, loving communication. If you haven't had that most of your life, that's another thing that can be quite overwhelming.
Okay, so in the nurturing and growing
Yeah.
up, if you
Yeah.
haven't had the permission to
Yeah.
verbalize your
Yeah.
feelings
Yeah.
about anything,
Anything. Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. And not only sort of verbalizing, but being heard is quite important.
Yeah.
Which is what we were going back to, the family and how
Yeah.
that actually trains us, for want of a better word, on how we go on in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how, I know, is there are there any particular stresses or any particular kind of mental health disorders that tend to commit suicide than others?
No. So just again with language, I know in Nigeria, where I think we're also broadcasting, I think it's still an illegal act to take your life by suicide. And in this country, in England, it was dispelled in 1963. So the reason why we used the word commit was because it was the committing of a crime, and you had to prove beyond reasonable doubt that it was a suicide. So a lot of people who've been bereaved by suicide and also who are in the suicide prevention world get quite triggered when people talk about commit, because it does bring the degree. Now, I think there's a middle way, because at one level, it could be a person feels that way through their religion or whatever, they committed a sin type of thing. However, if we look into the Bible, like one of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, and especially oneself. So there is that connotation, but that doesn't stop us as Christians or as any other religion to not engage in this agenda.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why we're talking about this show is because next week is World Suicide Prevention Day. And over the planet at any one time, someone's taken their life every 40 seconds. Now, I think on the talk that I did where I talk about passive suicide and active suicide. So, a lot of people die from many other illnesses. So part of good suicide prevention work is focusing on well-being. What do we need to do to take care of our minds, our bodies, and everything else? So a lot of the medical diagnoses that people get given, I don't necessarily think makes them higher at risk of suicide, because they say at any one time, research shows 1 in 20 people are walking around with suicidal thoughts. You don't have to have a mental health condition to be suicidal, nor do you have to be suicidal and then have a mental health condition. Even though one could argue at the highest level, it is all in the mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got the continuum of mental health. Yes, so you've got the continuum of that. So, but there is something that's coming along in research that people who self-harm are at risk of taking their life by suicide, because after a while they've numbed their cortisol response, which gives them the ability to be frightened, and so then they can maybe go forward. So it's a build-up of things. It doesn't happen normally instantly.
Okay. All right. Thanks for clarifying that, because sometimes people think that, anybody who is thinking of taking their own life has to have a mental health disorder, or is something really on the scale of being unwell mentally. So I think some of these questions are
you could energetically say in that moment they're mentally unwell, Maybe, but for me, one of the problems with our language again around this is we use language to stigmatize people and reinforce the taboos rather than responding to a person suffering in that moment. And then we can do as best as we can to be alongside.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I know you do a lot of work on suicide, prevention. Do you want to talk a bit about your organization before we go into?
Yeah, so I was lucky to be trained, and I say lucky because it made my life change in a different way. But back in 2015, the local authority where I live trained some of us in a suicide prevention course called Assist, which is run by an organization called Living Works out of Calgary in Canada, and it works worldwide. And that was a 5-day intensive course to learn to become a trainer in suicide prevention. And then we've got some other ones which we've gone on to. So for me, I haven't been in the ambulance service and many other jobs in my life. What I learned on that course felt such a good model, which anyone, professionals or people from the community, could do. So back in 2017, I set up Action to Prevent Suicide with a view of training people in the community, because as I said to you earlier, a lot of people aren't known to medical services and people are just walking around with thoughts maybe. So by having more people trained in the community, they become suicide first aiders, which now we're thinking about calling natural helpers, to respond to people who might be struggling. And rather than focusing on, oh, that's drugs, that's this, just try to understand that people are suffering through some degree of trauma and how can we support them before they even get into the services, because the services are really struggling to maintain a good enough service at present.
Okay, because I have heard that sometimes people take overdoses, and this was even during the COVID, and they would call the ambulance out. They would go to A&E, and they would just keep them there, and then the next day they would just be allowed to go home.
Yes, exactly.
As if nothing, nothing had happened. Nobody asked, oh, how did you get to this place that you feel that taking your life is the only solution. So you have Action to Prevent
Suicide,
yeah. So that's what you do, I think.
So, but since COVID, my understanding of what action, and my friend and fellow director really focuses on the word action. What action do we need to take? And sometimes that might also mean what non-action do we need to take? And so what I've discovered through COVID and also on reflection is that it's one thing training people to become alert to the possibility of suicide or even to be able to respond. But I'm really keen to collaborate and work with people now for us to address some of the causes of suicide.
Okay. And I know sometimes when we hear somebody has taken their own life, sometimes they'll leave a letter explaining why, sometimes they won't. But let's talk a little bit about families who are watching, or people who are watching who have been left behind, because somebody has done that. We don't know why they live, they write a note, and why some people choose not to. But I in my experience with people who've been left without an explanation, is there something that maybe you can share that can help them? Because it's quite a difficult way, it almost seems like they find it difficult to have closure.
The reason why I've been an R in there is I don't think you can really have closure. It's we do not have a courageous conversation around death in what is normal circumstances, let alone death by suicide. And I think what happens is in the family, again using that as an analogy, in the families I know, everyone in the family grieves differently. Imagine you've got siblings and one of them has taken their life, by suicide, invariably everyone's focus is on the person who's gone. And then the people who are here still are neglected. And then they can feel suicidal, because people who have been bereaved by suicide are 65% more at risk to take their life by suicide. So if we then do not talk about it, if we then do not look after the people who are left behind, and another figure is, they say for every suicide, 135 people are deeply, intimately affected. Yeah. So these are figures, and I must also say, every time I throw out a statistic or whatever, behind it is a real person. So I don't want to just feel like I have to do that. Yeah. So it's really, really hard. But I think one of the other things is to reach out to organizations or to people that have been through similar. And then it's that strength in circles of, I call it circles of support, which means, because even in the pain and the suffering, people feel they're alone and no one else has gone through this. And then you might end up going to an incredible service at St. Martin's in the Field, and you suddenly realize there's 500 other families who've been through this. So I think strength and healing can take place with other people. It's the biggest question, why? And sometimes there is no answer to that why.
I actually liked what you said, that even when we have an explanation for death, you know, say somebody passed and you know they were unwell for and we can understand that, and when somebody takes their life, it's even more difficult. And I think what you said, that sometimes we it may just be there, you know, we may not completely have closure, because other people might be encouraging the person or the family who's lost a loved one, or you need to close and move on. But I think what you're saying is that we can get healing by meeting other people who've shared the experience, because and even when you say 138 people, or the number that you quoted, it doesn't lose the importance, because it just shows that the family also, it might have happened to that family unit, but there is like a ripple effect that goes on for people who are connected with that person. So if it's somebody who is in university or in school, you know, the teachers are there, their friends are there, and it really goes on. So I think that in itself is comforting, when you say, you know, we're not now pushing people that you must close. This is something that you can do. But what you're also explaining is reach out to people who have experienced it, because they have an understanding that maybe your friend or your brother, you know, somebody else might not be able to really get it, because it's something quite unusual. Okay. So reaching out, I know we talked about kindness, noticing people, we've talked about engaging people in conversation and asking the questions. You know, just
one of the barriers that people often have in their head, which is a difficult one to overcome, is time.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is not something you can go, well, you should give 10 minutes or you do this. No, you just don't know. It could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour and a half, it could be 2 hours. So that's why the deprofessionalization of suicide prevention is important. Because, like you say, you can be held in A&E, but they've got all the other cases, and they go, bye, you go home. Or you can go to doctor's surgery, thanks, here are the pills, go home. Yeah, so this is not happening in isolation to society. So that's why we have to highlight it in society, but not make it sound like everyone's taking their life by suicide. Okay.
So it's also what you're saying is for us to have time for that person, time to spend with that person, to really engage with them, to connect with them, like you said at the beginning.
And you can only do that if you learned how to connect with yourself. Yeah, so that's why sometimes you can be trained and be a very good professional, but because you're struggling to be in your heart, because it's quite painful sometimes to be in your heart when you feel everything. Yeah, and some professions are be detached. Don't get too involved. Put a boundary up. Yeah, you haven't got that luxury in a family. You haven't got that luxury if it's someone you just work with.
So it's also being what's the word? Open with yourself, acknowledging that you
and
have
self-aware.
Being self-aware.
Self-aware. And that's not something we've really taught at school, but we need. And you asked me about some other aspects of our work. We've just launched something in this country called Natural Helpers, where we're going to try and train the young people to be peer-to-peer mentors, for their fellow students, as well as some of the teachers, so that people, before it gets really off the scale with problems, we can pick them up further up the river, like I said.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about risk. Yeah.
So when I hear that word risk, the first thing that happens to me, it does trigger me a bit. And it's like, no, that's fine, because we use it a lot, don't we? So I ask people,
yes.
I ask people, when you think about risk, I normally translate that as fear.
Okay.
So the reason why I say that is like, I am very comfortable with saying, I do not know whether this person is going to do such and such. However, I will do what I can to listen and protect, but I'm not doing it from a point of what I would call a risk assessment, which is a bit like fortune telling. I'm doing it in the moment and having an open and honest conversation with the person, unless they are not in a position to be able to do that. Then I might call the police, then I might ask them to be sectioned. But really, I don't really want to do that. I want to, risk is a funny thing, and depending on what life you've had and lifestyle that you've had and life that you've had, my response might be very different to your response on risk.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So I, as I say, do translate that as what am I worried about or concerned about or frightened about to make me think that I can control what's going to happen with this person. That's what I struggle with, the assessment of risk.
Okay. I think I was going towards the fact, say I'm having a conversation with somebody.
Yes.
That I'm concerned about.
Yes.
And they begin to share some of their feelings or their thoughts with me. Yeah. Just on as you say, deprofessionalize it. So it's just a friend, a colleague, somebody I know, and they're sharing things with me. Yeah. It might make me panic.
That's your panic, though. That's what I say to you. Yes. So that's the thing. Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to say happens within organizations. It's that you hit the nail on the head. And so that becomes your risk assessment. I can't deal with this. Okay, I'm going to do this. Now, I'm not saying that you mustn't get professional help at times, but the whole point of the training and the whole point of our conversation is to reduce the panic. Because if you panic, if you worry, if we have no calm, we can't respond, because it's like the waves are crashing around. But even if you are personally worried, we all have to learn to be calm. And that's where I said earlier why you have to trust that the person's ability to save themselves. If you don't think they're going to do that, that's all our stuff that we're projecting onto the person. So they become part of our mental projection, rather than you thinking, I don't know whether this person can live or die, but whilst I'm here with their suffering, there's always hope in my heart, and hopefully they'll feel a bit of that. So I'm lending them my light or my positivity. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So because I know sometimes when you've sort of gotten the person to feel safe and they're opening up. Yeah. And this person now is panicking and thinking, do I call somebody? Do I phone 999? This person is going to do something. Or if I leave them, they've now given me that responsibility. Now I feel responsible because they've shared with me that they're feeling like they need to take their life or they want to take their life. Yeah. So I guess in a simple way, how can we?
So through your connection, through your empathy, you will listen to everything. You would not be panicking because you will see that they are suffering. So then you could have, one of the most important things about good suicide prevention training is that you start to let go of what you see your power, and you allow the power to come from the person. So you can say something like this, for instance. So we've had this intense conversation and you tell me you want to kill yourself. Now, how are we going to deal about that? What are we going to do about that? I feel like I would like to refer you to this service because I am not capable. What do you think? Because if a person is starting to come round to that they want to live, they might have people around them that they would want to be involved. They may not have. And then you have to use a choice to bring in other professionals. But like we said earlier, if you get whizzed to the hospital in the back of an ambulance, sit in A&E and you get whizzed out and you come back out again, what has actually changed? Where has any connection taken place? So a stranger or a person just connecting, and that person being heard, being understood, not necessarily try to be put into prison straight away or in a mental institution. And then that's building that strength we talked about. This is a different form of resilience that we're talking about. This is life and death. This is wanting to live more than wanting to die.
Okay, because I think when we panic, we do what we think we should do.
Yeah.
As you know, what you're saying now is say to the person, these are options.
Yeah.
Yeah, and leaving them to make.
Yeah, to walk alongside the person. It's really hard. Rather than what a lot of our professions and even some of our cultures do, we dictate to people how they should be. And then that's totally destroying their sense of independence.
Okay. So it's listening. You can give them suggestions, options.
Yeah.
And just walking with them and saying, I'll be with you. I'm here. I'm not telling you what to do.
Yeah.
But this is what we could do. So
I loved what you said there about options. I paint a picture of different options and sort of talk about the merits of each one. So I sometimes like to use a phrase, not in necessarily with a person, but challenging with support.
Okay.
So or circles of support. So I have an acronym that we do a little course on called Oracles, and it's like observe, respond to what you've seen and everything else, ask the question, care, which is compassion, acceptance, respect, and empathy. Listen, because that's what you really need to do, more listening. And then safety. So where are you going to keep them safe? And in most of our courses, Living Works Down, we talk about keeping them safe for now. If you start to panic about the future, you're time traveling too far. It's keeping them safe for now. And then hopefully more nows create a longer future. Okay.
So can you just explain that? I get it. So making them know it's okay just for today.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? So talk about the difference between the now and
so when you're trying to look after a person in that moment, you are trying to get a mutual agreement to keep the person safe for now. And when I say now, that might be overnight. It might be, are you going to go to your parents? Are you going to go and stay here? Or are you going to, who's going to be with you? Do you need a person with you? All those questions come in and working with the person. I don't like talking about it in terms of a contract, but it is almost like a sharing, a mutual sharing that the person can come to make their own choice. And it is at that time that you might choose to escalate it because you feel they can't take care of themselves and are in danger of harm to themselves or others. So that's when you escalate it.
So if it's just, if the person is sharing this with you, they're just sharing their thoughts. There's no immediate danger. They're still able to talk about it.
And in the asking of the question, you can ask them, have you acted on these thoughts? Or what's really going on for you? And they might say, oh, it's fine, I just need to talk about it. So you don't know. There's a degree with all of this of not knowing, but knowing. It's a paradox.
Yes, but I think what you're saying is in the conversation,
Yeah.
if I can put myself aside
Yes.
and really listen,
Yes.
really hear, I can hear actually if they're just sharing thoughts and feelings
Yes.
they're having, if they're thinking of actioning them, or if they've actioned them before,
Yes.
or how
Absolutely.
far it is. And if they're not engaging in a logical way, then I might then suggest these
Yeah.
options
Yeah.
of help or assistance,
Yeah.
or keeping them safe, at least for the moment.
Yes.
And then in really, when you are sure that the person is not in a right or proper way, then you can call the ambulance or whatever. Because I think that's probably the biggest fear about people sharing these kind of ideas.
What's the biggest fear? What's the biggest
fear? The idea
fear?
that somebody's going to panic and call the ambulance, and then they get taken away.
Yeah, that's there, and that's why again we need more of a public health message around it. So in Australia they have something like it's okay not to be okay.
So that we can begin to make it easier for people to
and then we become more responsive, and then we'll know the level of the situation that we have. So we'll find the gaps, because we'll go, oh, we need this, and let's fix it. Okay. So that's why a lot of collaboration needs to take place.
Okay, with everybody in various communities, workplaces, school.
Yes, absolutely.
The government, because I think we focused on maybe home, where we feel that should be the first place where we should be noticed, but some people may not have that support system as a whole.
And the home is where a lot of the abuse takes place anyway.
As well,
So this is the problems, and that can go with a person for many years.
So we're also saying, if you're at work, please notice. If you're in school, please notice. If you're in uni, please notice. Be kind to somebody else. If you have struggled and you're struggling, that person who's sitting or standing next to you is struggling with something. Okay. All right. So I think we've sort of been round, but there was something I think you said when we had the seminar, which is about, when somebody is sharing that they're having these thoughts. Now, at what point, sometimes I've heard where people have said, oh, I knew, they told me not to tell anybody. And I didn't want to, break, that trust that they had in me. So which is it? Where do we
stand?
So
it's like I keep reminding you, how we think is really important. So for me, for someone to trust me, to tell me that they want to die and give me the opportunity to be alongside them, my duty of care is to support them. But if they are a risk of harm to themselves or other people, to then try and support that within the system that we have. My concern about the system, though, is that, like I said earlier, it doesn't necessarily do what it can do, because it's a more of a wraparound service we need for an individual, rather than just a response that, oh my God, I think you need to go to hospital.
Okay, so that might be what we have at that moment to do. But then they reach out to people like yourself. So do you want to tell us where you are and how people can find you?
So we're in Devon, but I mean, we act as a consultancy and advice, and we're trying, as I say, my take home for COVID is to move from trying to run a business, which is really hard to run a business, just doing suicide prevention training, into more of a service. So as I say, we're in schools with young people with our new Natural Helpers program. We work with organizations. We also are doing now some international work, which is just basically doing some of these briefings and understandings. Because, for instance, when we looked at Nigeria, we've only got 1,000 therapists. So there's no way we're going to train loads and loads of therapists in time to help support. So I showed people a model from Zimbabwe where we trained the grandmothers to be able to listen to other broader family members. So I think that's a good thing for some parts of Africa, and that will also speed up the ability to be kind, as well as to look at it from a community level. We don't have to ask our leaders to give us permission to be kind. Yeah. So it's about the top and the bottom meeting, or the grassroots doing it, so that everything changes. Yeah. So that's really, really important, I think.
Okay. All right. So we can find you in Devon, but
but just put it, if you Google action to prevent suicide, we should come up.
Okay, great.
And I definitely want to come to London and do some training for people. I have a daughter in London, and we've been talking about it on and off. COVID put a stopped that from happening for a bit, but in due course. And then we hope to go to Nigeria one day and train people locally to then become trainers, so that they can grow. It's like teaching a man to fish rather than buying them fish.
Buying the fish, yeah. Okay. What would you leave us with today? What I've learned is kindness, which is...
I think kindness. I mean, for me, there is a teacher on the planet who talks about kindness, the Buddha of this age. And I think as time goes by, that's the thing that's going to get us through all these issues, is kindness. Yeah.
So be kind to one another.
Yeah, especially yourself. Loving kindness.
Yes.
It's a hard thing to do, but it's very important, because that's what gives you the resources to keep going.
I think that's maybe a really good place to leave it, because a lot of times we can put ourselves to the back.
Yeah.
Because we're just pushing through another day. I'm just a strong dad. I'm just a strong mom. I'm just a hard worker. I'm just the teacher, the school. Things would fall apart if I didn't turn up today, or I took some time out to me. So the first person to be kind to would be ourselves, and then it's easier to be kind to others.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chukes. Thank you for a very enlightening program today. I'm sure
no worries.
People have learned a lot. Thank you again. Thank you for your time.
No worries. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. What have you learned today? Kindness, listening, and most especially being kind to yourself, and then you can be kind to others. Till we meet again, thank you for watching. My name is Lydia.
LCBN television broadcasts 24/7 on UK Freeview Channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Google TV, See Love World, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com.